Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of FECGTV, which stands for the Fisher Educational Consulting Group television channel. We are a YouTube channel that focuses on highlighting and elevating the voices of educators who are traditionally underrepresented or their voices have not been heard. Specifically, we like to focus on lifting the voices of our women educators, our women of color, and our non-majority educators. Additionally, we use this channel as a platform to focus on and elevate topics that get kind of lost in the shuffle, don't necessarily get elevated to the mainstream, but those topics that affect students that we fondly call here students from furthest from educational justice. These are our members of the BIPOC population, our Black, Indigenous, people of color. Those students that their stories haven't been heard, but are just as important as anyone else. So what we do here is we bring the best and the brightest from all around the nation to address specific topics that our different stakeholders from around the nation via survey have asked to be answered. This week, this Father's Day weekend, we're going to focus on family engagement, and specifically how family engagement benefits people of color, but specifically families of Black scholars. So with that being said, we have two awesome guests. We have Mr. Arthur Jack, who is the president of a local African-American parent advocacy group. And we have Dr. Chasity Bailey-Fakhoury, who is an assistant professor at Grand Valley State University. How are you all doing today?
Doing very well, thank you.
Doing good this morning. Thanks for asking.
Awesome, thank you. And I just want to come back to you, Dr. Bailey-Fakhoury. I want to make sure I got your title correct. Feel free to correct me if I messed up anything.
I'm an associate professor in the College of Education and Community Innovation. So yes, but at Grand Valley State University, yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that correction. So for those of you that are just tuning in for the first time with this session, our interviews are very short. They last from 45 minutes to an hour, and we tend to ask about 8 or 10 questions, which have been queried from surveys that we send out to different education stakeholders around the nation. So with that being said, are we ready to go ahead and jump into it?
Yeah, we're ready.
Yes.
All right. So for our audience, tell them a little bit about yourselves and why you do this work. Let's start with Dr. Bailey-Fakhoury.
So I was going to defer to Art because he's one of the reasons why I'm here, right? So
Our ladies first.
Okay. So I am a teacher educator at Grand Valley State University. So I'm preparing future teachers, right? To go out into the world and partner with families and students and help children realize their full potential. I am a former public school teacher myself, Detroit Public Schools. I taught high school for 15 years. So I'm steeped in education. I come from a family of educators. Education and teaching, that's my purpose, right? I know that that's my calling. And where I come to this work around African-American parent networks in predominantly white schools, because coming from Detroit, I experienced family members who were living in the city and who began to move out into the metropolitan Detroit area, into suburban communities where there were predominantly white students. And when we would get together for like Thanksgiving or Christmas or Memorial Day, I would hear these conversations around some of the challenges that my female cousins as mothers were coming up against as they were mothering their children in these spaces. And I was in my PhD program, and it began to really spark an interest for me as to what they were facing as they were going from the inner city urban context, predominantly Black schools, to the suburban context and predominantly white schools. And so my dissertation was around the work that African-American mothers do to support their African-American daughters, young daughters, in predominantly white schools. And from there, this path, this is my life's work, has just opened up into other places. And I ended up connecting with Mr. Jack in the African-American family network that he leads, wanting to dig a little bit deeper into the network and what it does for me to understand the ways in which African-American families and their children were being resilient in the face of these hardships and adversities that they were coming up against. So that's how I come to the space.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bailey-Fakhoury. Let's go ahead and transition over to Mr. Arthur Jack. And the question was, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and also how you come to be involved with this work. Were you able to hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. So how did I get into this space? So again, my name is Arthur Jack. I'm a parent leader at the African American Family Network. And long story short, my passion around it is, I'm originally from Louisiana. Moved into the Birmingham School District in 2006. And I did notice that as a minority within a majority district that's very affluent and the broad base, how can I help bridge those gaps between Black families into education, not only in the area advocating, but also how to be a resource for closing. I'm sorry. Let me take it back to the top. All right. So, yes, my name is Arthur Jack, parent leader, African American Family Network. And how did I get involved? And without getting into too much detail, by moving into the Birmingham School District, which is an affluent school district, I noticed that there's a need and gap for African American families, not only around the academic gaps, but also just the social and engagement. With the 4 children that I had in the district, I noticed that what I could bring in terms of a parent leader, in terms of value to the table, is the education, the athletic, and the social aspects, by using those key ingredients with the Birmingham African American District to say, how can we, and to create the value for us, and then also how can our organization be an asset to Birmingham Public Schools? And I think that last one is the key, because once the district identifies your affinity group as bringing value to the district itself and engaging with families, then it's reciprocated. And so when Dr. Chasity Bailey-Fakhoury came and we started engaging around her research, it began to uncover even more opportunities that I did not see and consider over the years. And I think we'll get into it during the interview.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It is interesting to hear both of your comments, because it kind of ties into a book I recently wrote. And one of the quotes that I had was, I identified the movement of African-American families from, I guess, what we would say, those 10 metro areas where they traditionally have been concentrated out into the suburbs. I called it the final frontier, because there are new, there are new experiences that we were not prepared for that we're encountering out there.
Right.
It's interesting because it's almost a 360 back to, or I guess not 360, but it's almost coming back to things that our parents told us about when they made the migration up. And we're like, oh man, I heard those stories, but now I see it, I see it in reality. So absolutely. So thank you both for that opening information. Let's go ahead and start with question number 2. So when you hear the words parent advocacy or parent advocacy group, I'll start with you, Art. What does that mean to you?
You know what it means to me, even more than anything else, is how, as just starting with the student, how can the student advocate for themselves to the district, and then along with the families, collectively advocate for themselves within the school district, not just with the teachers. It could be with administrators, athletics, music, all the full engagement within the district. So that advocacy piece as an organization means, how do we enable families, be the tool, and also be that that resource to help propel, to get the point across. And it's a two-way communication. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you. Dr. Bailey-Fakhoury.
So the advocacy piece for me, and I'm thinking of it specifically through a lens of African American families in predominantly white school districts. Okay, because if you're talking about Black families in predominantly Black school districts, the advocacy is going to look a little bit different. The challenges and barriers are a bit different, right? And so that's the frame that I'm speaking to when I'm talking about parental advocacy. So number one is, there is a battle really that parents have to undertake to say, we belong here. This is our community. We want the curriculum to reflect, the diversity of students and families that are in the district, whose tax dollars are funding the operation of the schools. So we have just as much right to be here as any other person living in the community. And so that advocacy is making a place for themselves and their children, but also to the benefit of the other students of other racial and ethnic identities that inhabit the school district, and teachers of different racial and ethnic identities who are teaching their children, and administrators and so forth. I mean, it is really to the benefit of everyone in the community to understand the African American experience, the Black experience, and that, it is important for the academic success of children, African American children in districts, for them to be centered. And so parents are advocating and fighting to center, Black children and the Black experience that is marginalized, not only in a predominantly white school district, but even in, districts where it's predominantly Black. Still, folks of color and their histories and ways of knowing and being are pushed to the margins. And what I believe is that this accounts for a lot of what we see as far as opportunity gaps that are present in school districts around performance and proficiency for African American students, is that they're not rooted, they're not connected in this larger scheme when we're teaching math, science, social studies, English language arts, right? And I think that what the African American parents are doing and have done in arts case, particularly affecting the African American history curriculum in the school district, was phenomenal and is a model for other parent advocacy groups to follow, to demonstrate how family, school, and community are really connected and can be a powerful force for advancing equity in education. And so that's what I think about. It's a lot layered when you're talking about parental advocacy, parent advocacy, from the lens of African American families in predominantly white schools.
Yeah, and I'm glad you hit on that point, because through that journey with the African American history course, and it's something that I didn't give much thought to, and that is we have African ancestry in America. And so there are families that I met that are of the Caribbean. So their experience is different from an African American experience, but some of the challenges are the same. So even within our culture, how do you bridge that gap and stick to that DNA level of advocacy and being able to get all the value that Chasity has mentioned? But also as a district, identify when you see in a majority district someone African American, they may not, that you think they're African American, but they may be of Caribbean descent. They may be of African descent. African descent, it seems from the parents I met, have been easier to articulate because it's a national. But the Caribbean, Latino, Black Latinos, how to fill those gaps in needs and culture in terms of advocacy, so they're identified and feel welcomed in the district. So
perfect. And actually, I want to bring you back, Art, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about, something in my notes that I didn't think about, but thanks to Dr. Bailey-Fakhoury, I want to highlight that with you. Could you give a little bit of information around the African American history course and the work that you all did to bring it about, or just speak to it in general?
Yeah, I'll speak to it general and really just kind of hit to the point. So there was an African American course that was taught, and it was taught by a white American. And it was a combined course between the two high schools. And it started off as like a pilot program, but it began to get traction. And then over the summer, there was some input that was provided to the faculty member to make changes and make improvements. And then at the start of the fall semester, when the class started, the end game was that those changes and improvements weren't implemented. And it came to the surface when there were two African American students that are very aware of their history. And it went through, and the professor went through the syllabus, and he hit on some points in the syllabus that wasn't African American history per se. Let's say teaching boys, talking about boys in the hood and Bloods and Crips. And they reached out to their parents, and one was very educated in the area of African American studies through Wayne State University. That really uncovered it, Sean. That uncovered what happened and didn't happen, and the checks and balances within the system that led to more discussion, that led to some heated discussion and different points, including taking a stand, where ultimately I spoke, along with some other parents spoke at the school board about the need to revise it. And guess what? The change happened. The change happened. We had African-American administrators and white administrators that contributed and identified the problem, which was good. So when you hit to the core of a core problem, it doesn't matter if it's black or white. It's a core problem. And it was addressed. And now the class has been embraced where it's been upwards of 35 or 40 students in it, and including white students that have been in the class.
So that brings us back around to that added value for everyone.
Yes.
So everyone as part of that learning community is getting that added value. Thank you. Now, I want to stay with you just a little bit longer, Art. So this channel is going to be watched nationally. This channel will be watched nationally. And there'll be other families in similar situations. I mean, there are affluent districts all around, and not necessarily the affluency, but some of the desirable things that are happening there will, the same way it attracted white families, Asian families, Latinx families, is going to attract black families too. And they're going to find themselves dealing with some of these same issues. So clearly, getting the curriculum, as Dr. Bailey-Fakhoury said, to be reflective of all people there and centering on black students. When you all made the argument, or the proposal, we'll use it that way, right? The proposal to bring this curriculum in, what value did you see that you advocated to the powers that be?
Well, the curriculum was the African American Studies. That curriculum, that class was already there, and there was some tweaks and input. But what had happened is, as in any problem, you really go back to the basics and you start really looking at everything, not just starting from your assumptions and points. And what it forced was to get additional input from faculty members at other universities to say, how do we really look at this curriculum? And because of that narrative, Sean, starting with the end in mind and with bringing in outsiders, I wouldn't say outsiders, but additional professionals with a different lens, that was the output of the better curriculum, which was phenomenal. And I guess I can give the quick example. African American class, we start from the slave ships coming from Africa. All right. When we had this study and discussion and panel discussion, say, why do we have to start there? And so they grouped it differently. And then there are two professors that teaches the class, not one, which was huge. And now you have this co-teacher experience in the class along with the teachers to really get that enrichment. So that's what I'd say in terms of the history of itself, yes. But how do you deliver it, and how do you hit the different aspects of it so that it's not taught traditionally, I think is what helped.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. So I'm just writing that down.
Yeah.
So a tip. Yep. So our tip for
Chasity,
our audience.
do you remember anything else about it? I can't.
Well, yeah, I just wanted what Art said. I really want to emphasize what he's saying, because you asked the question about value add for the entire district. And The district in this class did something that it had never done before.
Right.
It brought together the teachers the two teachers who were going to teach the class. It brought together distinguished faculty from one of the largest universities in the state of Michigan. Has African American history is their, expertise. It brought to
You hear, Sean?
I am here.
Understanding African American history in their undergraduate or throughout their entire life with their families. And it put that co-teaching model, which we know is highly effective, in place in this class. Now, I don't know what sorts of co-teaching models the district utilizes elsewhere, but I know that was huge.
Yes.
So what it brought to bear was evidence-based, research-based practices that we know are effective, that were driven by parents who said, no, we have to redo, this is not going to stand. And it pushed the district further.
Yes.
In any other thing the district has come up against when we're talking about curriculum and instruction. That is huge for the benefit of all students in the district. And so this is what, the power and the promise of networks such as the one where Art is the parent lead.
Perfect. Thank you. And that brings us back to you, Art. Our next question. As president of the Birmingham African American Family Network, what does success look like for you? In that position, if you're successful, what does it look like?
To me, success looks like, and I come from the tech background field, and so I like to stick with this analogy. So we all have phones, right? Some of us have iOS, some of us have Android, right? And when you buy your phone, you have some of the basic applications. You don't have to download a clock. That's already in the app, right? You don't have to download the phone function. But there are other apps that you can go out to the market and get, right? For your phone, and developers try to develop it for different platforms. Case in point, what success look like to me? Success looks like to me is the Birmingham African American Family Network being that core phone, that core platform. All right, that's who we are. We are like integrated deeply within the district in order to make things happen. And as the district need to leverage our organization for not just for Black students, it may be fundraising, it may be curriculum development, you name it. We're here for it. And then across the district, we come from multiple backgrounds. I came from research. And from that, here comes the applications. There's a need. When an app is developed, there's probably an opportunity and need, right? As a core organization, what success looks like is that we can identify those niche points, those pain points, those needs, and develop for our own community, or developing collaboratively with teachers or the school district or other families in order to bring something new and exciting. So everybody with their own phone, consider the phone is in your family, that can use that tool or have that tool for communication to make things happen. Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is we want our kids to reach their peak. And as an organization, BAFN, how do we help the students, their children, the families, through their journey in the district to reach their peak? Not just in academics, it could be in sports, it may be some disciplinary issues, you name it. And then as a district, how to tap in deeper to understand that customer experience, family experience within the district so that they can get better. The African American history class is what it demonstrated how when you pushed, you can go farther and you can start thinking out of the box. So what's the final point, what success looks like to me? As an organization, we're an asset to the district to think out of the box, and they are our asset in order for us to enable us to be better in the box, which is the Birmingham Public Schools.
Hey, thank you, Arthur, very much. Dr. Bailey-Fakhoury, do you have anything to add to what he just said?
No, I support it 100%. However, the network defines success for themselves, that's success, right? So, yeah.
Perfect. So for our next question, I think we tapped on this quite a bit, but I just want to, since this is a teaching video and people that are looking to start their organizations are going to look to this for some foundational information, I'm going to ask this question again more, I guess, explicitly. Please explain to our audience how you two came to collaborate together around this work. I think we kind of tapped on it, but if you could specifically lay it out.
Go ahead, Chasity.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Chasity. I want you to go first.
So, like I said, my my dissertation work was around African American mothers in predominantly white schools, and one of the things that I kept hearing about. So it was a mixed method study, using surveys and focus groups. And so what I did was, in the focus group, something that kept coming up, and even in some of the open-ended questions on the survey, I kept hearing, I wouldn't have known anything if it wasn't for the African American Parent Network. I wouldn't have known this if it wasn't for the African American Family Network. I'm like, what is this African American Family Network thing, right? And so I'm doing my digging, and I'm learning more about these networks. And so I had an opportunity I always knew I needed to come back to this because I kept hearing it over and over in the focus groups. And so I had was up for my sabbatical when you're relieved of your teaching duties to just do research. And so my sabbatical idea was now let me pivot. Let me really dig into understanding these African American parent or family networks, how they came to be, how are they, constituted, what do they do, their efficacy. And so I reached out to Mr. Jack, and they vetted me. He and another administrator in the district, African American woman, trying to see, okay, what she want, what they put me through it, right? Yeah. And that was in 2018 when we first connected, because my sabbatical was starting in 2019. And so I have known Art since 2018, and this is like this is a friendship now that has really blossomed from this research that we started. And so Art has been phenomenal. It's been a phenomenal collaborator in this research, as have all the families who spoke to me, the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, everybody in the network just really opened their arms. And so this has been a great journey, and I've learned so much, and I am just looking forward to what else will be unveiled as I continue to, dig deeper. So Art,
Yeah, and to add to it, when I met Chasity and I saw her commitment, Sean, to her research, and having worked in a research organization at one of the big three, I know the energy it takes, and I know the journey. And part of research is that you may hit some areas that may not bring value, but it's research. It may be insightful. We'll let you know what not to do. And so as she embedded herself in our organization, Chasity came to the meetings. And Sean, you've been to the meetings. You may have some numbers. You may have very few people there. It may be different topics. It may be some energy part of the meetings because somebody got a personal problem going on, which is another purpose of the organization. How do you have that space to come and talk about it? Be a sounding board. And I don't think I shared this with Chasity. I was hoping that through her year working with us, and it's something I've seen in research and working in engineering, that something happens to help get everyone to gel, galvanize, uncover some opportunities to make us better and even more insightful for our research. And guess what it was? The African American history class. Who knew that would be the spark that helped uncover curriculum, the gaps, the processes, the checks and balances within the Birmingham school district, and probably in every district. Whenever something happened, you begin to find out where you got gaps in your process, right? And where those opportunities are. And through it, I was so happy she was embedded in it, because Chaz was able to give me insight and to see things from a different perspective. And then to participate with the effort and also gain the respect of the administrators within the district, which is huge when you're coming into a district. When she gave one of her presentations, this was before this past one, Sean, the feedback I heard afterwards was that, I mean, she's just phenomenal. How can we find more people like her? And then this final effort when Chasity came and spoke when you were at the meeting, Sean, that just helped close the gap. So I think that we not only was a blessing to her, but she was a blessing to us to help open our eyes on how to be resourceful and also reach out to others outside of our district that are trying to do the same thing.
Perfect. Thank you. So Chasity, I want to come back to you. I want to make a connection to what Art said. I did have the extreme awesome pleasure of attending one of your presentations, which, me being a statistician, in my head anyway, right? I loved it because it was like right on point. So during my interviews, I like to do something called like a flash focus. So we talked quite a bit about locally, but I know your research, just as I think back to when I attended your presentation, you had some national data too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So according to your research, what does the landscape look like nationally for African-American parent advocacy groups?
Mm-hmm. Well, Sean, thank you first of all for attending the presentation and for those accolades. I appreciate it. This is deeply important work, right? And for me, for us as communities. So nationally, yes, I wanted to understand. Okay, this phenomenon in Michigan that has like these 15 family networks, African-American family networks or parent networks. What does it look like across the country, and how is Michigan situated in that context? And what I found is, the numbers that I'm going to quote are only for school district, African-American parent networks in school districts. Now, an elementary school or a middle school or a high school might have a African-American parents association, but I wasn't really focusing on those. I wanted something where it was more broad-based across the district, not just in a single school, right? So what we know is that currently there are about 60 of these, or a little bit over 60 of these African-American parent networks, or Black parent associations is another term that is used for them. They are highly concentrated in 2 states, California and Michigan. Uh-huh. And so I've spent some time thinking about, and I've connected with some folks in California, trying to get a little bit more of the historical context and insight. I can't wait to be able to get out to California and get into some of the research repositories and pull documents around the creation of these districts. But it seems like the thing that keeps coming to the surface has to do with why California and Michigan. Well, one of the things that comes up is University of Michigan and the Black action movements that happened, the BAM 1, BAM 2, BAM 3, that happened at the University of Michigan starting in 1968. And Ann Arbor had the first, so far that I've been able to see or identify through newspaper clippings and other records, the first Black Parent Association in the state of Michigan. So if we think about the University of Michigan and what was happening with the Black Action Movement, we see in the early 70s, like 72, the the Black Parent Association comes online. And so, of course, these Black Action Movements at University of Michigan were all around addressing concerns about, Black students that Black students have, that the university was not responsive, that it was a place of a racist institution as it related to Black students who were attending, right? So, and then we see another action movement in the 70s and then in 87. And so it feels as though that history, right, and that kind of activism is one way that we can think about laying the ground for the eventual creation of these African-American parent networks that exist today. Now, there were some things happening in Oakland County in specific around the African American parent networks there. But again, going back historically and trying to root it, I'm going to say that was one issue. So in California, we see San Francisco State University and the student strike that occurred there from 68 to 69 and what was going on at UC Berkeley. And again, Black students talking about shutting the institution down if it's not going to be responsive to the needs of Black students. And so we see movement there. And then the creation of these networks. The creation of the networks there as well. So I don't know. Can you still hear me? Because I see my video has gone off, but okay. So we'll just wait to see if it comes back on. But
it's frozen, but we can hear you.
Okay. So nationally, that's what it looks like. So in other places, when we think about the landscape, there's a few in one or so in Tennessee, a couple in Maryland. They're just sprinkled across the nation. Now, after we have come to this moment of, what we've seen with school districts and this legislation popping up around not teaching accurate U.S. history, right? Wanting to, teach mythology and not really get into the real history of the nation. I am going to be going back and identifying the increase in numbers of African-American parent networks, Black parent associations, because I'm sure that there are new ones that have come online through the school districts as a result of things that have been happening as this pushback, this backlash against diversity, equity, inclusion efforts that K through 12 school districts have undertaken. So I've been in contact with some parents in Tennessee who are trying to get a network off the ground for their school district. And so here and there, folks have reached out. So that's kind of what the national landscape looks like presently.
Thank you. All right, it looked like you were about to say something. Is that the case?
No, it wasn't. I was just listening closely.
Okay, so let me just push you a little bit further. May I say Chasity? Is that okay?
Please, yes.
Okay, thank you. So you kind of narrated the past and present. What do you see as some future benefits, considering also as we're looking at, as you mentioned, legislation and things that are on the horizon? If you kind of had to brainstorm, what would be some future benefits? The reason I'm asking this is because as our audience is listening, they're thinking like, okay, we're setting up this organization. We need to, forecast what things we might need to deal with. So let's kind of prep now. Mm-hmm. So what do you see as some of the future benefits?
The benefits are enormous as far as I'm concerned. Number one, these networks or associations, they do foster African-American resiliency. So we're talking about, again, how parents and children cope, adapt, and develop resilience, that ability to cope and thrive when experiencing hardship, right? So that's number one for me. It creates, again, a benefit of, it continues a tradition that is over, where are we, 22? That is over almost, 150 years in the making, okay? When we think about the importance of public education, it was freed folks in the South who were pushing for universal public education. That's how we come to universal public education, free K-12 education in this nation. And so it's a continuation of a history of making sure that folks are educated, that all folks are educated. And so while this might seem like a little kind of esoteric, but I really believe it to be true, is I think Black folks understand that Black folks' liberation is bound up in the liberation and freedom of all other people, that is, we're all connected and all other identities. And so education is one of the most important vehicles for helping to get us there. And so that's why there's this constant striving all the time, right? That's why it's always this critical hope. And that's what these networks provide, that there is critical hope. We are going to continue to advance. We're going to continue to push the nation. We're going to continue to make sure that we're living into the principle of becoming a more perfect union, right? And I think that is at the heart of what they do, and that is a huge benefit. Supporting African student success, right, is another thing that is extremely important for these networks to do, and to create a sense of belonging for students, their students in the district. So while the academics, we know, very important, right? We can't get, but that's social. Having that connection with other folks like you who can understand what you're going through, right? Whether you're a student or a parent living in the community, that is huge to provide that support network, right? So that is a benefit. And of course, just empowering folks' advocacy, empowering, there is strength in numbers, and that is true. And so you have this great group of folks who are going to help push the school district to live into its ideals and values. And so that's a huge benefit.
Thank you so much for that great answer, Chasity. Arthur, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of the African American Family Network history. So the organization has been around, I'd say, between 2 to 3 decades. I mean, it's very informal. It started with teachers and a few families that saw a gap and need, and it started with tutoring. That ultimately led to the district adopting Saturday school. That is one of the notable outputs from the African American Family Network that the district saw as value, that they embraced, got funding for, and moving forward with it. And that's huge. And as these new networks, let's say, looking at the video, trying to figure out how do we get started, if you find that pain point, niche need, and one is that achievement gap, then you have the ear to teachers, administrators, etc. But as Chas is saying, it's more than that. It's also feeling a part of the district, especially when you're the minority in the district. And then two, when I took the lead, one of the questions that always came up was, how should I say this? How many members do you have? And what's your vision and mission? Which is a question you ask anywhere, right? But ultimately it comes to this. And I call it the 3 T's: your time, your talent, your treasure. And Chas has heard me say it. If you're not willing to bring your time or your talent or your treasure to help move things forward, and you're just coming to receive, then you're not bringing value to the table for the organization. You're just coming to extract what is a benefit to you, and, to put it bluntly, be selfish. So as an organization, you have to put self aside and be selfless to be successful. I've seen parents come and go, as you can imagine, with families through the years during the district. Things come up where you can't participate or not. But if you're always there, you're always visible, or when there's times where numbers matter, then come forward. And I give the advice for all leaders in an organization. If you're trying to get off the ground, just like any startup, it takes that sweat equity, and it just takes that commitment for people that care. And you have to be selfless. That's how I move forward. Then everything else will start falling in place, in my opinion. Younger families to families like mine that, the last 2 have finished high school. So, and that's key, Sean, for all the families to identify that journey.
Hey, thank you, Arthur. So I'm going to stick with you, Arthur, and I want to ask you, just as you look back on your work, for future leaders, maybe someone that follows behind you or someone trying to start a program somewhere else, what have you seen as the barriers as the parent group leader? What have been barriers to your work? And then keep in mind, Chasity, because I'm going to parry over to you and ask you as a consultant from that perspective, what has been some of your barriers experienced?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Arthur.
I will lean in on one barrier, and because I can go through many, and also success. The one barrier is consistent support and engagement throughout the year for more than, let's say 5 or 10 parents and meetings. That barrier, and every family has a reason why they participate or not, or engage. That is the one barrier that those that are looking at the organization will ask. Like, well, like that one question: how many in it, and what's your vision and mission? If you can say I got 20, 25, yeah, that's great. But if you don't come around, you don't go to school board meetings, they're like, all right, that's just a Black family. And whenever we hear from you, it's about a problem, they're going to say, well, that's all they're for. So that is the one barrier, and the optics that I saw as a challenge. And as a parent leader of the organization, you got to be able to adapt to the different folks in the within the network. And you're going to run into many. And I'm speaking to the audience when you take on that leadership role, because you're going to see families coming with their own agendas and missions, and you got to balance it. Because at the end of the day, it's all volunteer. One of the other barrier was funding. We talked about, all right, how do we get members and have membership dues? And that conversation was going on before I got into the audience. But it's an important element if you want to do things. So if you can establish that charter where families say, if it's $10 a year and I see some value or something coming out of it, they would contribute. If they don't, just say, well, why am I doing this? Because many think, what's in it for me versus what can I bring to the table to make something in it for all of us? I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And over to you, Chasity.
Yes, so I would echo the things that are shared. I also think barriers when it comes to how are you going to, what's the relationship going to be like between the network and the district?
Uh-huh.
There are different models, right? So for example, the African American Family Network that Art is the parent lead for, the district, they have the meetings in a district facility, right? In an administrative center. The district officials feel accountable to the network. They come and they give reports at different meetings, right?
Yep.
And there is a real relationship between the administration, the central administration, and the network, right? Which lends a lot of credibility, right, to the network and what they're doing. They have the ear of the superintendent. They have the ear of members on the school board, right?
All right.
So it is, for some networks, they're a bit more detached from the district, context. They will hold meetings in public spaces, right? Not necessarily with the school, in the school building. It's more of a, and I don't mean the word insular in a bad way. It's not, it's just a different way of doing it. So I think a barrier is trying to figure out, how are you going as a burgeoning association or network, how are you going to balance that, right? Some people feel that if you're connected to the school district, you're holding the meetings in a building, maybe they feel like the network is maybe more controlled by the school district and isn't as autonomous. So you have to understand the context in which you're operating, right? And be real about appearances, right? And how that could undermine what it is that you're trying to do, or how it could augment. So that's something to think about. What is the relationship going to be like with the district officials? That could be a barrier. Also, as far as a barrier is concerned, is folks thinking that they have to be as active as the most active parent in the network. And that should not be the case. And folks in leadership should not be looking at parents to be as active, right? That there are roles for every person to play. So like when Art says your time, your talent, or treasure, that's for real. If you can't give your time, then what expertise or talent do you have that the network can make, use of? Or can you offer money to support activities? So everybody doesn't have to be at every meeting, volunteering for every particular event, leading. I have to lead. No, that there is a space for every person, and the leadership needs to understand, to make that space. So I think for me, those are a couple of the most pressing barriers that folks might come up against. And you have to, from the outset, say that you're making space for everyone, right? And what you can do or can give, that it is beneficial. It will be beneficial, right? So
yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and those are some of the core points, Sean, and to the audience, that when you start the organization, you have to consider, because you're a small organization in a bigger organization in any situation. And what Chasity hit is really spot on. It is the years and engagement I've been in the district with 4 kids that has enabled me to have different relationships with central office, faculty members, coaches, the ADA club, band, whatever. Through that mutual respect, that helped open doors for communication for our organization going forward. But what Chasity said even more so, when I got into this role, there was a commitment from central office to the organization, because the Black teachers were at the meetings all the time. They were part of the early on efforts. And if an organization can connect with the Black teachers, that's definitely a shoe up, and not just through PTA, but just in a casual setting, And then it helps their jobs, and also may help do some things that African American teachers or faculty members in the district feel is a lack, because they may be saying it, but as an organization, if we push it to, and then they say, hey, here's what this organization is doing. No different from other affinity groups and districts.
Perfect. Thank you, Art. So as we're winding down, I want to tackle 2 very difficult but important questions. And you kind of started down the path of answering my next question, Art, but let's go ahead and get to it. So as we well know, some of our parent groups often go defunct. What are some creative strategies to engage parents and keep these organizations alive and active?
Yeah, I think the key is getting back to the basics, and that's the students. The one and I always like to give examples around use case. So one of the end year events that I helped reinvigorate was, I called it a student panel, and we had a recognized African American at the Oakland County District that came and was the MC of it, the event, in so many words, and asked the questions and develop it. And when I had that panel with students at all ages, one, that brought parents out, okay? That also brought teachers in central office out, because what they want to hear from the students. They want to be able to hear, and from the questions that were set up by the moderator, and he comes from an educational background, to be able to ask, so teachers and parents and other students can make note of it. That was huge. And that's how we always ended. That's typically how we ended the year before COVID. And that's something we didn't do this year. And that's something I want to make sure we keep doing, to have that touch point, because the administrators want to hear from the students. That's how you keep the organization going. Of course, you can have like History Month programs, women's history, credit. But when it comes to having a collective voice from the students and mainly the students, where they can hear and ask some questions, that's great. Because all district got questionnaires, right? Everybody like to do a survey. That's a real-time survey for those 2 hours by listening to those kids for the questions. I shouldn't say kids, the children of all ages.
Thank you. Chasity, do you have anything to build on to what Art just said?
I think trying to, protect against, networks losing their way or becoming defunct, you gotta try to have an overabundance elementary families with elementary age children who can grow with you through the network, right? You got to have that secondary, the folks who have students in middle school and high school as well, because there's some knowledge sharing that goes on between the elementary and the secondary. Here's the journey that we travel, and the elementary parents are learning as well, so that's beneficial. But you do want to have an overabundance of families with young children so that they can grow with you through the network. I think that that's important. So when it is, at the beginning of the school year with curriculum night or whatever the opening kinds of programming are, to have your network or association set up tables to get, bring on those young families into the network. I also think about what Art said with the student angle. It's important for the network to connect with the Black Student Union at the high school, if there is one, that the 2 presidents or the 2 leads of the organizations, should be connecting, that there should be space in the parent network for the BSU president to give a report, once a quarter or whatever it is you all determine, because that's important. To be able to have that intergenerational piece is a strength and a way to kind of keep the ties. And then the other thing that I would say about protecting from going defunct is a balance of personalities. This has to be a big tent, right? That we need the Martins and the Malcolms. We need the Angela Davises and the Fannie Lou Hamers. We need everybody, right? And it's not, they're so militant, or you need some of that militancy, right? But you also need that more kind of, taking a larger perspective as well. You want to have that. You got to have that. And it's a model of what you said, Sean, going back to when you were thinking about folks migrating from the South to the North and telling folks what they experienced. We've learned these lessons as well in movements, right? That Black folks have created in this nation, that we had to have everybody in the movement to make it work. And the same thing in these networks as well. And so that would be another thing that I would say around protecting against the network losing folks and becoming defunct. It is important to have a balance of personalities and welcome all folks into the space.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that elementary school piece, because that has been the challenge for our organization. Is at the elementary school age families, they're more engaged with the school itself, be it classroom moms or other activities at school. And then you're younger, so you're much more you're preoccupied with it, and to think, all right, I'm gonna go to this Tuesday night meeting or Zoom, it just doesn't work to your schedule. It was the same with me, and I was coaching youth ball, my 4 kids. So that's key to elementary school, and setting up the tables. But I go as far as to say setting up an office at the elementary schools for families. It's that deep, because it's going to take that ongoing engagement, because families go through cycles, where you can engage, disengage, you have different experiences. And every family, and I'm sure we all have children that mine are out of elementary, you want to make sure your child has that foundation. And that's where you're thinking so much about the achievement gap, more, to me, in my opinion, from my experience, more than anything. And that may be the emphasis of it as a use case, as an organization, the achievement gap, and really focusing at that elementary school. Because when they take tests to be able to get the AP classes in high school, which is what families want, that might be more the emphasis to help families. it may, and another example, it may be, hey, we're going to have date night for parents and we babysit the kids.
Yeah.
That could be another thing as a means to, to keep that energy and engagement. So, and that's when you got to think out of the box as a leader of an organization and as an organization itself. Because that African American history class that Chasity, we had folks on all sides of the table. I moved on all sides of the table, till I sounded sometimes a little radical. But it's important to flush out and have real conversation. And I think that's what we got to have more than anything, real conversation, period.
Thank you, Art. As we close out, Art, I want to bring it back to you very briefly. We heard about Dr. Bailey-Fakhoury's background, but we didn't hear about your professional background. Do you mind tapping into that? And I'm going to make it, I have a purpose in asking this.
Okay, yeah, because I purposely didn't get into it. So, initially. Yeah.
Notice I said briefly, though, so I brought you back to it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Long story short. So I'm a graduate of Southern electrical engineering degree from Louisiana. That's how I got to Michigan in '89. Recently retired from Ford Motor Company in research. As far as my professional background in audio, I've worked in audio infotainment, some of the more technical areas. And how I tie that into, all the conversations we've had is around education, preparing us so that not only from high school going on to college, and then as corporations, as students go off to Black colleges, I've led 3 Black college tours, supported with the district. And it's something I like to see as a staple. How as a company, you're trying to find talent. When the talent go off to school, how do you bring it back? I've met teachers within the school district, not to go off, that they grew up in Birmingham, went off to school, came back teaching in Birmingham. Why can't that be for our families? So.
Thank you. And the purpose of why I asked that question or posed it was because in some of our surveys, people were like, well, how do I do this if I'm not an educator or I'm not in some kind of social services? So I wanted to let them know that, you're widely recognized as an effective parent group leader in this work. And the fact that you're a non-educator, a non-social service practitioner shows that you can be effective. Any parent can step up to the bat as long as they have that why and they're willing to do the work. So I wanted to bring that home. All right, now let's go ahead and close out. If any parent wants to reach out to either of you to get more information on how they can be effective in, improving their current program or even starting one, how do they get in contact with you all?
I guess we could start with me. So we do have a private Facebook group. That's one. We have a website now that we could share at the end. And also a BAFN phone number that you can call, leave messages, text, etc. That's the quick hardline way to get in touch with us. For me personally, Sean Fisher knows how to get in touch with me. So if you really want to have real conversation, talk with Sean. I'm a type that I don't spend a lot of times with emails and text messages. It's easy to just pick up a phone, Zoom, and just have that conversation. To me, that's I told you how to get in touch with me, but the what to get out of it, it just may be a conversation. And that helps me to understand and to connect with you. Period.
Yeah. Thank you. And definitely this video will be embedded into a blog post. So we'll have some of those specific data points there as well. Chasity, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I would just say my email is great. BaileyCH@gvsu.edu. And I know you'll embed that, whatever you're, and phone call. I listen to my voicemail. So my office is 616-331-6485. And folks can contact me either way.
I'm glad you said that, Chaz, because I don't listen to my voicemail all the time. So if you call, my box is full, send me a text, then I'll get it. I want to get that on record.
I listen to my voicemail. So.
All right, there we go. Perfect. All right, so let me compose myself here. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank Mr. Arthur Jack, who is the president of the Birmingham African American Family Network, which is located in Birmingham, Michigan. And also, I would love to thank Dr. Chasity Bailey-Fakhoury, who is an associate professor at Grand Valley State University, also a former high school teacher as well. So she has agency and currency in this game. She's not just speaking from theoretical perspective. She's done the work. So thank you there. And again, my name is Sean Fisher. I'm the proud CEO and owner of the Fisher Educational Consulting Group. And this has been another episode of FECGTV, which is a YouTube channel that focuses on lifting the voices of BIPOC educators and parent advocates for the purpose of highlighting and improving the outcomes of our Black scholars and other scholars of color. Thank you, everyone, and we hope that you join us next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Okay, have a good day.